When backlash whispers, it can be spun. When it detonates, people disappear. This story is not about bad press. It's about panic disguised as strategy. It's about control slipping, allies freezing, and a carefully built image cracking under the weight of its own repetition. And it begins the moment Montecito stopped feeling safe. When backlash arrives quietly, it can be managed. When it explodes, people move. That line says everything. Because after the Netflix release, Montecito didn't feel like a sanctuary anymore. It felt like a spotlight with no off switch. Viewership numbers told one version of the story, reaction told another. And according to accounts circulating among industry insiders and palace watchers, Meghan Markle did not stay to absorb the shockwave. She left. Not publicly, not ceremoniously, but decisively. This wasn't about one headline or one review. This was about momentum turning against her. Fast. And the silence that followed from people who used to speak loudly on her behalf. The Netflix project was meant to be the reset button, the final word, the moment that reasserted dominance over the narrative. Instead, it exposed something far more dangerous than criticism: fatigue. The Netflix release was designed to do one thing above all else: reassert control. That was the gamble. After years of fragmented interviews, selective revelations, and escalating criticism, this series was positioned as the definitive account, told on Meghan Markle's terms, amplified by a platform powerful enough to bend culture. This wasn't just content. This was strategy. Long-form storytelling was supposed to succeed where soundbites had failed. The belief was simple and seductive. If people saw the whole story, resistance would soften. And at first, it almost worked. Curiosity surged, clips circulated. Headlines focused on access rather than skepticism. For a brief moment, it looked like vindication. But then the tone shifted, not with outrage, not with scandal, but with something far more lethal: disengagement. The backlash did not arrive as outrage. It arrived as fatigue. This was the first real warning sign. Critics didn't argue claim by claim, they questioned the pattern. Another retelling. Another framing of grievance, another insistence on moral clarity without anything new. In media terms, outrage can be monetized, fatigue cannot. Once audiences stop leaning in, even defenders struggle to hold the line. Inside Netflix, executives noticed. Because viewership alone doesn't equal success. Completion rates matter, sentiment matters. And by the end of the first cycle, those numbers split sharply. People were clicking, fewer were staying. Hollywood reacted the only way it ever does: quietly. Agents who once spoke enthusiastically about future collaborations stopped returning calls. Producers who framed Meghan as a disruptive voice began recalculating risk. The industry isn't emotional, it's predictive. And when momentum turns, distance becomes self-protection. That recalibration didn't stay confined to boardrooms. It reached Montecito. According to people familiar with the atmosphere inside the home, Meghan initially framed the backlash as coordinated hostility. That explanation had worked before, but this time there was no clear enemy, no single outlet, no ideological villain, no obvious antagonist, just audiences who stopped caring. And that distinction changed everything. At the same time, Prince Harry went quiet. No defensive media tour, no urgent rebuttals, no extended clarifications. His absence spoke louder than any statement. Some interpreted it as restraint, others saw exhaustion. Behind closed doors, advisors fractured into camps. One side demanded escalation, more interviews, more framing, more insistence that criticism was cruelty in disguise. The other side warned that doubling down would harden fatigue into rejection. Their advice was radical in its simplicity: disappear, reduce visibility, let the cycle burn out, stop feeding a narrative audiences were already rejecting. This divide exposed a deeper problem. The story could no longer be controlled by output alone. Every appearance risked confirming the very critiques the project was meant to silence. As coverage intensified, Montecito changed. Photographers lingered. Sightings became news again. Ordinary movements were suddenly reported with microscopic attention. For a place chosen specifically for insulation, the environment became volatile. According to local observers, Meghan began spending more time away from the property. At first, it was framed as routine travel, then as meetings, then as wellness. But the timing was impossible to ignore. The absences aligned too perfectly with the peak of backlash. Speculation hardened into narrative. And when the decision to leave Montecito, even temporarily, became visible, it carried symbolic weight. In celebrity culture, absence during controversy is never neutral. It's read as impact. From the palace, there was no response. Inside Buckingham Palace, there was no incentive to intervene. This wasn't constitutional. It was commercial, and the institution had learned long ago that stepping into media storms only amplifies them. Silence preserved distance. For Meghan, distance served a different purpose. According to people familiar with her thinking, staying felt like surrendering control of the frame. Leaving offered a reset, new surroundings, new optics, a pause that could later be reframed as intentional rather than reactive. By this stage, the reality was unavoidable. The Netflix release hadn't collapsed outright, but it failed to move perception in the intended direction. The backlash evolved beyond critics and settled into audience disengagement, and Montecito, once marketed as a fortress of reinvention, became a liability. When that happens, explanations don't follow. Movement does. This wasn't the end. But it was the moment the strategy cracked. And once strategy breaks, everything that follows becomes damage control. Once the backlash stopped spiking and settled into pattern, the problem inside Montecito changed shape. This was no longer emotional fallout. It became logistical. Montecito had been chosen for one reason above all others: insulation, privacy, control. After Netflix, those advantages collapsed quietly. The attention didn't explode, it lingered. Paparazzi didn't swarm, they waited. Local sightings didn't shock, they accumulated. Routine movements were logged again, not with excitement, but with scrutiny. According to people familiar with the situation, the sensation wasn't exposure during controversy. It was visibility during decline, and that distinction is brutal in celebrity strategy. Inside the household, conversations stopped being about messaging and became about containment. What appearances could still be justified? Which movements could be framed as routine? How long absences could last without becoming a headline? Advisors split again. One faction argued retreat looked like defeat. They insisted visibility was still leverage, selective interviews, controlled appearances, a reminder of moral framing. The other faction shut that down. They warned that repetition had already done the damage. More explanation wouldn't clarify, it would confirm. Their argument was simple: audiences weren't hostile, they were tired, and tired audiences don't return because you ask them to. According to people briefed on those discussions, Meghan favored action. She believed narrative control was reclaimed through presence. Silence, in her view, surrendered the frame to critics. She argued backlash could still be reframed as bias if challenged aggressively enough. Prince Harry didn't agree. By this stage, his posture had changed completely. He wasn't pushing back, he wasn't defending, he wasn't escalating. According to those close to him, he was drained. The Netflix reaction confirmed something he had been suspecting for months. Public defense no longer shifted outcomes. It only extended the cycle. This difference didn't erupt into confrontation. It manifested as delay. Harry slowed decisions. He avoided commitments. He declined opportunities to respond. From Meghan's perspective, this felt like withdrawal at the worst possible moment. Inside the home, tension didn't need shouting to be felt. Strategy meetings turned operational. Where to stay? How long to leave? What could be framed as normal travel instead of retreat. According to local contacts, Meghan began leaving Montecito for longer stretches. At first quietly, later deliberately vague. Privately, the explanation was space. Publicly, there was no explanation at all, and silence always invites interpretation. In entertainment culture, absence during backlash is never neutral. The question becomes unavoidable. What are they avoiding? This is where the move stopped being logistical and became symbolic. Montecito wasn't just a house. It had been marketed as permanence, a foundation, a base from which a new public identity would be built. Leaving it, even temporarily, signaled that the base had failed. Industry observers noticed immediately. Hollywood doesn't respond to statements, it responds to behavior. Reduced presence paired with silence reads as recalibration. And recalibration triggers caution. Projects built on personal narrative require sustained goodwill. Backlash plus retreat undermines confidence. Inside Buckingham Palace, nothing changed. There were no statements, no briefings, no quiet interventions. This wasn't indifference, it was boundary. From an institutional perspective, this wasn't a constitutional issue. It was commercial fallout, and institutions do not step into market corrections. They wait. For Meghan, waiting wasn't passive. According to people familiar with her thinking, leaving Montecito served multiple purposes. It reduced immediate scrutiny. It interrupted the news cycle. It created time to reassess, reposition, and plan re-entry. Time is often mistaken for retreat. In crisis management, it's leverage. Harry supported stepping back, but for different reasons. According to those close to him, he needed distance entirely. distance from commentary, distance from defense, distance from a cycle that had become emotionally exhausting and strategically futile. This divergence mattered. Meghan viewed absence as repositioning. Harry viewed it as disengagement. Neither approach fixed the core problem. The Netflix backlash had altered perception in a way movement alone couldn't reverse. As this phase closed, one truth became undeniable. Montecito no longer functioned as a shield. Staying offered no protection. Leaving didn't erase criticism, but it acknowledged impact. In public life, that acknowledgement is often the first step toward reset. Whether the reset would succeed remained uncertain. What was clear was that the decision to leave wasn't impulsive. It followed internal division, external fatigue, and recognition that the environment had shifted. Backlash doesn't force people to move immediately. It forces them to admit that staying no longer serves them. That admission marked the real turning point. By the time Meghan's absence became noticeable, institutional responses were already set. There would be no palace intervention, no clarification, no attempt to steer interpretation. From the palace's perspective, this had moved out of crisis and into consequence. Hollywood recalculated differently. Executives didn't ask whether Meghan still had supporters. They asked whether the audience was expanding or shrinking. Personal narrative depends on emotional buy-in. Once that weakens, leverage changes. Meetings slowed. Options were reconsidered. Momentum stalled. Not cancellation. Caution. And caution reshapes opportunity faster than criticism ever could. Meghan's continued absence from Montecito fed that reassessment. Movement during backlash is read as acknowledgement that the environment has turned hostile. Private explanations don't matter. Public interpretation fills the gap. Harry's role during this period became increasingly passive. He didn't oppose stepping back, but he didn't lead it either. His focus turned inward, reducing exposure, preserving energy, avoiding escalation. Some observers interpreted his silence as acceptance of the backlash's validity. Others saw emotional withdrawal. Inside the palace, it was read as instinct. When the environment turns hostile, do less, not more. That instinct works in monarchy. It doesn't translate cleanly to Hollywood. The entertainment industry rewards momentum. Absence without explanation breeds uncertainty. Uncertainty breeds caution. Caution reshapes leverage. By stepping away from Montecito, even temporarily, Meghan altered how her position was calculated. The palace didn't exploit it. It simply allowed distance to widen. This wasn't generosity. It was consistency. As weeks passed, the public conversation moved on. But the recalibration remained. The Netflix release hadn't reset the narrative. It revealed its limits. Montecito didn't protect against that revelation. For Harry, the lesson landed hard. Public narratives can't be forced back into alignment once audience sentiment shifts. Silence doesn't reverse it. It absorbs it. For Meghan, the challenge became re-entry. How to return without reigniting the same response. This backlash didn't destroy careers. It changed leverage. It forced movement. It exposed saturation. And it demonstrated a modern truth of power. Sometimes decline doesn't arrive with scandal. It arrives with silence. Doors close quietly, phones stop ringing, and the absence speaks louder than any statement. Meghan didn't leave because of one headline. She left because staying no longer served the strategy. And when strategy fails, movement becomes the last remaining option.